Hello, pinball people. I'm Brian. Okay, so welcome to PinDevCon. This is a deep dive under the hood for the Mission Pinball Framework. Eli, who's our firmware developer, among other things at Fast Pinball, is running the video equipment, which is usually my role. So, hey, Eli, how's everything? Are we good to go back there? Thumbs up from Eli. So, this session is a deep dive under the hood of the Mission Pinball Framework. And I note that we have both deep dive and under the hood. So my thinking with this, by the way, my name is Brian, and I'm one of the members of Fast Pinball. And I was also the original creator of the Mission Pinball Framework back in 2014, I think May of 2014. So we're pushing 10 years that MPF has been a thing. And what I want to do with this talk is, MPF has a lot of like user documentation, and there's tutorials on how to build your config files. There's a lot of like people helping each other in Slack and online forums. And so what I want to do is talk about not using MPF, not installing MPF, but rather just like looking at the MPF itself. Like, what is MPF? How does it work? How are the files structured? All that sort of thing. So this is something probably not super useful for users of MPF, but more for developers or people who want to maintain MPF. So, by the way, this software that is open on my computer right now is Visual Studio Code. This is free software development environment. It's open source, sort of, from Microsoft, sort of. I don't actually know how that works, but you should use this for editing your config files in MPF, Visual Studio Code. I'm going to flip over here to the web and go to GitHub. And this is github.com/missionpinball. So this is the GitHub location where all of the MPF projects and files and all that sort of stuff lives. So you can see there's 35 repositories that are part of Mission Pinball. And I'm not going to go through all these, but MPF itself, the MPF repo, that is the actual Mission Pinball framework. One of the most important things to understand about MPF is that MPF itself is just the game engine, so it runs all your game logic and it talks to all your hardware, but it does not handle graphics and sound. It's just hardware and game logic and like your rules and all that sort of thing. So MPF is the core MPF project. MPF docs is our documentation. That's what powers the website, docs.missionpinball.org. All that content lives in MPF docs. MPF examples has a bunch of different examples of past MPF configurations. A lot of these are probably old, and I don't know how up to date nowadays. MPF MC, that's the MPF media controller, and that is it's an option to add graphics and sound. So if you have an LCD screen and you've got like videos playing and your scores and your scenes and all your audio and that kind of stuff, that's one way that you can add the graphics and sound to your pinball machine with the MPF media controller. There are other versions of this. So some people use Unity for this. Some people use Godot. Some people use, I think Rust, someone did, or Lua or something like that. But the point is MPF itself, there's like two pieces of it. There's the MPF core engine, which does the game code and the hardware interface, and then there's a media controller where you've got more flexibility and you can sort of use whatever media controller that you want. For today's talk, I'm going to dive just into the MPF game engine itself and sort of how that works under the hood. There's a few other projects in here. Like I said, there's 35 projects inside the Mission Pinball repo. So we have different projects for talking to virtual pinball, the stuff that powers the website. There's the MPF monitor. The MPF monitor, that is, I don't know if there's a screenshot of that in here. Yeah, the MPF monitor, this is the graphical application that sort of looks at MPF and sees MPF running in real time. So it looks at all your devices you have configured, like how many balls are in different devices, where are they, what color are the LEDs, what's the switch state, what are the coil states. And you can even take a photograph of your playfield and drag and drop lights and things like that into different positions on the playfield and kind of see it running in real time. So for me, the MPF monitor is the second most important part of the Mission Pinball environment. MPF software, number one, MPF monitor, number two. The media controller and all those other things are like way when you get farther down your project. But for me, the very first thing I do is I install MPF and I install MPF monitor, and that gives me everything I need to like actually develop my game. So let's go back into Visual Studio Code. And in VS Code, this is the actual MPF project. So when I go to the Mission Pinball repo on GitHub, I click on MPF. Excuse me. You see all the files in there. By the way, so there's different branches within MPF. Like dev is just the current current working in progress branch. That's where all the current changes are. So if you download dev today, it might be different from someone who downloaded dev yesterday. There's also specific branches for each release. So with MPF, every year or so, I should back up and say, MPF is an open source project with no real leadership. That's a good thing, maybe? I don't know. Like, it's not owned by a vendor. It's not owned by a person. There's no one, like, in charge of MPF today. Like, there's a bunch of people that have admin rights who can post in code. But there's no one, like, it's just sort of a project that exists out there in the world. And every year or so, after a bunch of changes have been submitted, mostly by, like, I'm part of Fast Pinball, so I submit changes to MPF for Fast Pinball hardware interfaces. Other people that work with other platforms or other developers will submit their own changes. Every year or so, we'll just kind of bundle up the changes and call it like, oh, what version are we on? Like 0.56? Great, here's 0.57. It's just another kind of random bundle. So you can see there's different random bundles that you can go to the different branches for. I should say, people think that the release versions are like more stable or like more supported. And that's not really true because, again, Mission Pinball Framework is open source software that's not really owned by anyone. Like, there's no support. It's like the support is go to Google Group and ask your friends and see what you can do. There's nothing really stable about it either, in the sense that, what makes a release is we decide, hey, there hasn't been a release in a while. Let's just bundle these up and call it version 55. And but version 55 might not necessarily be more stable than the dev version or a version prior or anything like that. Kind of the Wild West, which is what open source software is all about. So anyway, so this is the Mission Pinball MPF repo. There's all the files in here. You can download the files. You can download it as a zip. You can clone it and use GitHub. That will be a whole separate conversation about how to use GitHub and everything. But bottom line is, on my computer, I have it in my MPF folder. If I look at the files that are on here, these files in my MPF folder locally are the same files from this repo on the web. And so this is the folder that I'm going to open up into Visual Studio Code. And so if you haven't used VS Code, it's kind of standard. It's got your files on the left, and you've got your code you're working on the right. A couple of things I'll look at. So in the root folder, what do I want to look at? Authors. You can add your name to the list of people who have contributed to MPF. So if you do make a contribution, add your name onto that. I should say I was the original creator of MPF back in 2014. But look at all these names on this list. Like, a lot of people have contributed to MPF. I worked on it for 3 or 4 years, like a lot. Then I took a few years away. Then I came back. There's Jan Concert did a lot of work. Quinn Keppen did a lot of work. Anthony Van Winkle did a lot of work. There's a lot of people who have done different contributions over the years. And so people kind of, you might be working on a project and get into it and do a lot of stuff for a few years, then kind of get away, and kind of go in and out. So there's a lot of folks, though, that have put a lot of time into this. The other thing here is on the setup side of things is project.toml. So last summer, this is recording now in June of 2023. June 2023, the inaugural PinDevCon, Pinball Developers Conference, as part of the Northwest Pinball and Arcade Show, with sponsorship from us, Fast Pinball, as well as CoinTaker and Planetary Pinball. This is June 2023 when I'm recording this. Last summer, in August of 2022, I spent about 3 weeks and rewrote the installers, because MPF, one of the things with MPF is we try to make it work on all types of computers, Windows, Mac, and Linux. But in today's world, you can't just say Windows. Like, Windows runs on ARM and Windows runs on Intel. Mac runs on ARM and Mac runs on Intel. Linux runs on ARM and Linux runs on Intel. There's many different versions of Linux. There's Raspberry Pi version of Linux. There's Windows 10 and 11. There's Mac. There's lots of different versions. And so, and by the way, Mission Pinball Framework, it runs on Python. And so today, the version of MPF that most people use runs on Python version 3.7, 3.8, and 3.9. The latest version of Python is 3.11 right now. Python 3.10 is about to come out. And I'll show you separate. I've got a fork updating MPF to run on later versions of Python. But the point is, MPF runs on different versions of Python, on different platforms. There's like 15 different permeate ways of running MPF. we can't support everything. We try our hardest, but sometimes it might be like Windows only works on Python 3.9 because building the media controller on Windows is very hard, and I don't want to build it more than I have to. So it's just streamlined. But the point is, for people who are out there and are like Python developers, this pyproject.toml file is the indicator of like the new way of packaging projects within the Python ecosystem. So Python, like 3 or 4 years ago, just got very complicated, like how you package up Python applications and present them out to the world and share them with people. We've updated MPF to use the new versions of the installers and the new way that Python does things. So if you look at pyproject.toml, I'm gonna go all through these things. You can Google this and ask about it, but it shows like what the requirements are, what the dependencies, dependency versions, all that kind of stuff. So pyproject.toml has all the information for setting up MPF. If you look inside this folder, there's a couple of things. The build scripts, actually, I'll start at the beginning. The GitHub folder, it's a .github, and then there's workflows. This actually has the workflows that run. So every time someone checks in code into MPF, a bunch of workflows on GitHub will run automatically. So you see this one that says like run tests. These are these GitHub workflows. This is anything hosted on GitHub. GitHub is part of Microsoft, and so is Azure, and there's always like cloud-based builders and runners. Every time you check in code to MPF into GitHub, it picks up these YAML files in here and starts doing things based on these files. So here you can see it's like actually like running tests on like this matrix that runs on Windows 3.7, Windows 3, Python 3.8, Python and Windows 3.9, like Python 3.10. The point is you can when you look in GitHub, you can see all the commits that commit here, and you can see like all the actual tests running in MPF and everything that's actually doing automatically. All of that is what's in these workflows, in these like run tests file. So if you're like playing with this, by the way, what does this file do? How do we find out like what's this run tests do? I don't know what this is. How do I find out things in the world right now? You go to ChatGPT, and I say like, what does this file do? And paste it in there. And there it's going to explain everything. So like, if you're not using ChatGPT, you need to be using ChatGPT. It is phenomenal. I think it really helps with like MPF even. This is going to go through and explain like line by line by line, like what this thing actually does. By the way, it's a quick little plug also. Visual Studio has a plugin for called GitHub Copilot, which gives you AI like integration into your code writing itself. And it's getting pretty good with MPF. So as you're doing your MPF configuration files, it'll do like MPF autocompletes and all these kinds of things. And it doesn't even need to be trained. It just crawled enough public open MPF projects on the internet over the past 10 years that it kind of figured out on its own how to do things. What is the Mission Pinball Framework? I'm using GPT version 4, which is a little bit throttled and slower. But GPT is pretty good with MPF, so do not be afraid. Chat.openai.com, $20 a month. I would pay $1,000 a month for it. I'll say that on camera. Anyway, so we got our workflows folder in here. There's a build scripts folder that has like building the Windows stuff. Like this is just scripts that we use to kind of build things manually. These are more important than MC. The docs folder, it's interesting. The docs folder inside the MPF repo is for the code documentation. So remember the actual user documentation? There's a separate repo for that called MPF docs. The code documentation, which today lives at developer.missionpinball.org, and it has all the like the API reference and all that kind of stuff, that comes out of this folder here. So this is just like developer documentation. The main folder we care about is the MPF folder. So MPF folder is where all of the like the Mission Pinball Framework MPF package exists. A couple things in here. I'm not going to go through everything like sort of step by step. The commands. These are all the commands that are run. Like you can type MPF, MPF both, MPF game. These are the commands that actually do things. So when you run MPF both, what's it doing? It's running this. What does that do? It runs this. By the way, what does this do? Copy, paste in ChatGPT, say, what does this do? And what I'm getting better at, like what's really cool at the top of this thing, command which launches both the MPF core engine and MPF MC, that's going to give ChatGPT enough hints to like know what you're looking at. You don't even have to give it a lot of outside color. Just paste it into ChatGPT and be like, what is this? How does it work? And it's pretty good at that sort of thing. So that's what's inside that commands folder. Config players is interesting, confusing. A config player has nothing to do with pinball players and MPF. It's something that plays config files, essentially. So you know, like your shows, like a show file is like a list of steps. And ordinarily in shows, like when shows began, it was just lights, right? It's like, because a show is like a light show. And in fact, I think it was called like a light show player. And like, here's the lights. And you want to turn on this one for green for 1 second, this one off, and increment. It was light shows. Well, then we realized we need to add other things into shows. Like you might need to add drivers into shows, because like some lights are controlled by drivers to turn them on or off. You might want other things like sounds in shows and videos, which come out of config files. You might want servos in shows. Do you want to animate characters with the things? So now any device, anything in MPF can be put into a show, and it's that show. Static electricity for the win. So you see these config players like the blink and light player, block event, coil player, device player, light player, all the different things in MPF. These are the players for those. So the light player, this is the code that actually processes config files for lights and actually plays it. So like notice there is no servo player right now, and people are using more and more servos in machines, and people are like, oh, how do I add servos into shows? You don't, until someone writes a servo player to go into here. So whoever needs servos, how do you write a servo player? I don't know, copy this into ChatGPT and ask it to. But that's where that kind of stuff is. The core folder of MPF, this is like all the MPF core files themselves, because like what the Windows folder would do for Windows. Like it's all the important files. So like assets, like this is the core baseline for like an asset is anything that's loaded in, like a sound file or a video. This like the ball controller. Oh, I just saw it reset again in the back. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea why it would just keep on doing that. So sorry. Hopefully, internet, you get some. We get some stuff out of this. The ball controller. This is driving. This is showing. This maintains the count of all the balls, all the devices. Which balls need to be where? Are balls in the play field? The balls need to be moved around. Balls in MPF. Like one of the things MPF does. With like MPF tracks every single pinball and it knows where every pinball is. A ball must exist somewhere at all times. A ball can't disappear. So in the world of MPF, a ball device is a thing that can contain balls. And so a ball is at all times, it's either in a ball device or it's in the state of transit from one device to another. So the play field is a ball device. The trough is a ball device. A VOOC is a ball device. Like anything that can hold a ball is a ball device, and the ball is either in a ball device or it being transitioned between ball devices. And how you know on what type of device it is, where is there switches, how does it track, all that kind of stuff. So the ball controller is what maintains all of that. I mentioned the ball management in MPF is kind of a double-edged sword. It can be confusing to get right, to get all the configs done properly, but once you get it right, it's glorious. And like we've used like Star Trek Next Generation with all the ball movements and subways and all these kinds of things. Like you can just say, I want a ball here, a ball there, a ball there. And MPF figures out how to move balls around, and it knows like which devices feed other devices. When a ball ejects from a device, what ball device gets it. So it can manage all the balls for you and move them around as needed. But that's based on you actually having your configs and everything kind of set up. So it can be sort of a pain to get everything configured, but once it's configured, it's pretty awesome. Ball search handles all the ball search code. Ball search in MPF is also fairly automated. Every device in MPF, within MPF, there's different devices. Like a flipper is a device, a drop target, a stand-up, a hole, a trough. Like all these things are devices in MPF, and every device in MPF has its own ball search features. So when MPF like loses a ball, the playfield will say, "Hey, I don't think it's a ball here. We need to go on ball search. It'll post an event which says we're in ball search mode, and then every device knows how to respond to that ball search mode. So the devices kind of handle their own ball search, and when you're tweaking ball search, you're not tweaking overall ball search. You're tweaking the specific devices and like what they do in ball search and what their priorities are. There's ball search phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, where each phase can be incrementally more intense. Like if you have a ball, like you might not want to reset drop targets because then you might like mess up what the player is doing. But if it's like ball search phase 3 and we still haven't found the ball yet, like I guess go for it. So ball search is handling all this kind of stuff. All this art code, I guess I don't need to go through all this stuff. Like, the delay manager, there's a lot of delays under the hood. Like, fire this in 500 milliseconds, do this later. There's delays for the watchdog and light shows, like every 30 frames a second is every 33 milliseconds, do this. So there's a delay manager handling all this kind of stuff. The device code is the base code for all devices. Events, MPF is an event-driven system. Anyone who's done MPF coding knows that. Like, it's all about, like, we talk about MPF, what it fundamentally is, besides a hardware interface, it's an asynchronous state machine. So it's just posting events, and things are subscribing to those events, and when those events are posted, they do something. So the event manager is just every time something happens, a clock tick, a ball change, a switch input, it posts an event, timer expires, anything happens, devices or other things that register for those events, they pick up those events and they do something based on that. You can do lots and lots of events. We have hardware benchmarking and benchmarking built in MPF. Even on like a regular NUC type computer, MPF can handle hundreds of thousands of events per second. So you don't have to worry about too many events. Like computers are really, really fast. But all that stuff is in the event system. The machine variables, which is, there's like players and player variables. Like there's the player objects are in here, which is the concept of a player with all their variables, like what player number are you, what score, all the custom variables you create for your game, how many shots to wizard mode, all that kind of stuff. The mode controller that loads all different modes, starts and stops modes, unloads modes, knows the mode queue, dependency modes, all that sort of stuff is in there. More overhead talking. Should I keep talking, Eli? Can you hear me in the headphones okay? Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I'll keep talking. This machine file in our core folder. This is the main core itself. Like this is the main loop that runs, and the main this is what does everything. Machine.py is the actual controller. We call it the machine controller. It is what runs an actual MPF machine. If you think like randomizer is its own thing, because you want to randomize pinball, but there's lots of different kinds of random. Like, do you want truly random? Do you want fair random per player? So if something is randomized when the first player is randomly picked, but then a second player, if they get that, it's the same for them. Like if you're in tournament mode, you want it random, but the same for all players, or even the same for all players all day. Sometimes you want random, but not two in a row. Like for sounds, like slingshot sounds. Like David Thiel talks about, if you have a pop bumper triangle, you want different sounds in the pop bumpers, but you don't want to play the same sound maybe twice in a row. So randomly pick one of the four with equal weightings or different weightings, or just pick one randomly but don't repeat. There's randomizer rules that you can use, and now you can apply these randomizers to anything in your game. So all this capability for randomizers, we don't have random functions on the light show or the sound engine or this thing. There's a randomizer module in here that you can interact with just via the config files. You can add randomized parameters and have some very high-level sophisticated randomization for anything you're doing inside the machine. The text UI, this is that, when you run MPF in a console and it pops up that little text window and shows you switches and balls and that kind of stuff. That's a text UI. It's called a TUI. A GUI is a graphical user interface. A TUI is a text interface. So anyway, these are the core sort of features in there. There's not as much work that ends up getting done in here. This is fairly mature nowadays. Devices is what holds all the pinball devices. And this device folder, by the way, is generic for all hardware platforms. Various devices have hardware interfaces also. So if you look at the devices in here, this is everything that could exist in a pinball machine. Accelerometer, the achievements, you're configuring those progress towards your wizard mode inside inside your game. Ball hold, the ball routing stuff, combo switches. Like MPF handles combo switches when you need to like have like an orbit, counterclockwise versus clockwise. If you have like left switch, like right switch, left switch, or left switch, right switch, depending on the order within like half a second, that gives you a counterclockwise hit versus clockwise. You can register shots based on combos and everything. Diverters or DMDs, like these are drivers, drop targets. I don't have to read all this to you. I mean, this is all the code that is doing like all of the devices. This is where all the magic happens, and where all the code lives that does everything in there. The switch device. There's a lot that goes on with switches, and I didn't talk about it in the core stuff. There's a switch controller. I talked about the ball controller that's responsible for like all the balls and where they are, and what state they're in, and how many balls exist, and do we lose one or not. There's a switch controller which manages all switches in the machine. And the switch controller knows things like what the real state of the switch is, like not just inverting optos. It's funny because people within pinball, you think a switch has two states. Active or inactive, like on or off. That is false. A switch in a pinball machine has like 5 states. Because if it's on, that's a bummer. That did that 0 times yesterday. I don't know what's happening back there. I do wonder, like my laptop, it's like, could the laptop being plugged in, like have some ground completion that's, I don't know. Anyway, a switch controller, like a switch could be bad, right? Like if a switch is stuck on, that's not the same state that a switch being on. That's like a bad switch that's stuck on. If a switch is stuck off, again, that's not a good switch that's off. That's a switch that's stuck off. A switch could be intermittent. It could be like janky, where it sometimes goes on or off by itself. It could be like a stuck switch where it goes on properly, but then it sticks on for a few seconds before it comes off. So there's like a lot of different states of a switch that are more so than just what your hardware is reporting on or off. Might be accurately reporting what it's seeing, but again, it doesn't know like mechanically, oh, someone just adjusted this in lane and now the post is stuck on that switch and it doesn't pop back up. So the switch controller is what sort of tracks all the switches and like what the real state of the switch is and tries to help you as a game programmer, program around broken switches and handle all these like switch conditions and stuff. So anyway, the devices folder contains all these devices. Exceptions I won't get into. This just captures all of the, like when things crash and how you route the crashes and what you do with crashes. Because it's also like MPF has a concept like when you're developing your game, you want to have as much information with your crashes as possible. You want it to crash often. Like you want it to be very picky and crash like if anything doesn't look exactly right, like you crash. Like crash immediately and give me lots of information so I can fix it. When you're in like production mode or show mode, never crash. Like keep running. The old mantra is like keep taking quarters. And on the show, it's like let that start button keep on working. So, there's sometimes when MPF will crash hard and it can't recover. But even in production mode, you're like, that's fine. Restart everything and just keep on going. Or if a switch is being weird, just like disable it and work around it. So there are different modes. So the reason that like exceptions in MPF there's a whole different class of exceptions and where they all work is because your exceptions do different things depending on what mode you're in and how you're using MPF. File interfaces just contains all the information for like how MPF works with files, like YAML files for writing out configs. The pickling interface. Pickling is this thing in Python where it basically takes memory, things that are in Python memory, and just like dumps it out to disk, like a memory data dump. And MPF does that for the config files. When you load configs, like by and large, the longest MPF loading time is loading config files, YAML processing. Which funny, just like 2 weeks ago, I actually added logging to log each YAML file I was loading. It hadn't been doing that before. For 10 years, people were like, my loading hangs for like 30 seconds and then picks up again. And you add a log file to log what YAML file you're loading, and yeah, you got like 86 shows and 45 configs, and it's like dun 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 dun. It takes a second. So now when MPF loads, you can see it's loading all those YAML files. Well, loading, processing, config validation, all that kind of stuff takes some time. Once they're in memory, MPF automatically just dumps all those pre-processed configs down to disk via this pickling interface. So the next time you run MPF, it actually checks the timestamps of your config files and the timestamps of this cache. And if the cache is more recent, it loads from cache. And that loading is going to be significantly faster than the loading of your actual config files. It also gives you a little security to obscurity, because when people are bundling up games for production, you can delete your config files and use just these cached pickled files. It's possible to disassemble them if you want to, but it's like going to keep the casual user from like tweaking something in your MPF config. Media controller contains things that MPF needs to talk to the various media controllers. Modes. These modes folder, these are modes that are built into MPF. So these are like the regular modes that you would create in your own game folder. When you create your own machine folder and you have a modes folder that has all your modes in it, it blends that together with the modes that are built into MPF. And you can override these modes and take a few away, but like attract mode is a mode that exists as a baseline. The game mode, the credits mode, if you want to add credits for like taking money and tracking all that and like replays and everything, service mode, the match, tilt. All these kinds of things are modes that are built in and you can use. And all these modes have a lot of like very robust features, and you can configure everything from config files. So the tilt mode in terms of like tilt warnings and what else, like, preventing tilt throughs, like how much settle time you need, like the plumb bob, if it's a hard tilt, like every time the plumb bob hits, you add 5 seconds to the settle time, and it can post an event like player 2 ball start is paused while we wait for the plumb bob to settle down because that player just had some stuff happen. So all the built-in modes in MPF are in here. Platform interface is the code on like how it interacts with platforms. The platforms, this is where I live. The platforms folder is where all the various hardware platforms live. And so you see like, FAST, which is what I'm working on, like OPP, all the various like, Spike, all the various platforms that MPF plugs into, that code lives in these platform folders. I'm going to come back because I want to dig into the FAST platform a little bit. But while I'm finishing through here, plugins, MPF does have the ability to run different plugins. The plugins aren't used too much. Like there's a Twitch bot that can automatically, if you are streaming a game on Twitch, it can stream to Twitch as a Twitch bot, like what's happening in your game automatically, which is kind of cool. Like players 2's up, the score, achievements that happen, it just puts it right in the feed, which, I don't know, kind of neat. There's a Switch player, which allows you to play back switches from log files. You can even take a log file that you just had, and the Switch player can scan all the Switch events from that log file and then play them back. So if you want to recreate a problem again, you can like play back the same, like it crashes every time I do here, you can save that and like play those switches back in automatically. A few other little, the tests, by the way, pardon me, this test folder, these are all the tests that run. So remember when I was on GitHub and I was showing you like all these tests running when you check in MPF, the tests themselves are all inside here. So like, test ball save. So if I go in here, here's this test ball save, and it's getting this config file called config YAML. Here's a machine path it's using. Here's a platform it's using. And then here's a test, like post an event, start mode 1. Make sure that mode ball save is enabled. Assert that that's true. Post an event, stop mode 1. Make sure that ball save is stopped. Test early ball save once. Okay, like fill the troughs. Advance the time 10 seconds. Make sure that we have 2 balls known. Make sure that there's 2 balls in the trough. Now start a game. Now post an event called enable 1. Now assert that this thing is, so we're going through, do this, check this, do this, check this, do this, check this. So even though this file here has one, so this file here says test ball save, and it's like test early ball. Here, there's like hundreds. I mean, there's like probably 400 tests just on ball save itself. And what's cool is if you go back in here, you can see the config files, like see the machine path tests, machine files, ball save. So in this test folder, I go into tests, I go to machine files, and I go to ball save. And now I can see here's the config that this ball save test is using. And you can see how like this is the config file that ball save test is actually using. And here's the modes that ball save test is actually using. So the reason I mention this, if you're ever unsure on the documentation, like, it's up, because MPF, like no one is in charge of it really, the documentation, how good is it? I don't know. Did the person who wrote a new feature write documentation for it? Maybe yes, maybe no. If you find documentation is wrong, did you check in the change and fix the documentation, or did you just like make a note and move on? So the documentation over years and years and years might not necessarily be in sync with like what the actual software is doing, but you can go into these tests, because these tests, like again, you go in here, green, 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 green. These tests are all passing. So if a test passes, that means like everything that test was doing worked, and you can go into the config files and see what's actually happening under the hood. So if you're ever not sure what's happening with the config or what's actually supposed to happen, just go into these config files in these tests and take a look underneath here, and you can see what the actual configs are and what actually works. So to me, like the ultimate documentation is the tests themselves, and seeing like how that actually happens in there. So that's here in all these tests. I won't go through all the rest of them. The last few minutes, I want to take a look. Oh, final things. So this is in the MPF folder. Two things right here. MPF config.yaml. This is the baseline config. You've got your machine config.yaml, which is your machine config. This MPF config.yaml is the baseline config. So every time you run MPF, it loads this config first, then merges in your config, then merges in all your other configs. There are command line options for very extreme cases if you want to customize this and override things, but this you can see as the default config, like which modules are here. The custom config, and you'll take out the modules that you're not using. What config players are loaded, what device modules are loaded, what plugins are using, what platforms are loaded. So if you're going to package up a machine to like get it ready to roll, you can make a copy of this and call it like your config.yaml. Use command line parameters to not load the default config, and then you can load in like only the fast platform because that's all you're using. You can load in only the device modules that you use, only the various settings and that kind of thing. Like the BCP connections, if you're not using BCP, you can remove it out. You can actually remove the BCP engine altogether and the connections from MPF. So this is where you actually do some like deep level customization for your MPF. I don't worry about this like while you're building it, and if you're a home brewer, maybe not. But if you're taking a machine and gonna like package it up and like just get it ready to go, you get rid of all the nonsense you don't need by editing, making a version of MPF config.yaml. The second file that's in here is a config spec. Now this is the file that this is like the specification that's every single setting within MPF that's valid or not valid. It tells you what those settings are. And the config file validator that loads up all your config files, this is what goes and reads through and tells you it checks every single value. Is this a string or a list or a multiple? If it's a list, like if it's a ball device and you're listing a switch, is it a switch? Is it a valid switch? Is a switch useful in your game? This is the specification of all config files. And this little specification standard is something that we invented ourselves in MPF land. So you can see it's literally every single setting. And it tells you like this valid in, is it valid in mode config files or machine config files or both? And then you see like achievements. It's a list. And it's a list of achievements, enable events. It's an event handler. It's, here's the names and the values and the defaults. If I look in here for like fast, for example, like here's the fast section. This is the new, I'll mention this later. This is my own fork where I'm working on our new fast platform to integrate. So you see like the fast section has net, EXP, audio, segment. These are the different fast connections. This is a subconfig for like fast net. So fast. Net, what goes in there? Subconfig, fast net. Okay, what goes in there? Port, it's a list of strings. IO loop, it's a dictionary. It's a subconfig of fast IO loop. What's an IO loop? You can see it. Model, it's a string. Order, it's a number between 1 and 9, etc. So again, if you're like not really sure what needs to go in a config file and like it's just like you're not getting it, it doesn't matter what the documentation says. This config spec is what MPF loads, and it's cool too because maybe what version of MPF are you using? Maybe the documentation is a different version, or documentation is old, or you're not sure what you're looking at. Like this config spec from your MPF is what you're actually looking at. So that's sort of a good thing to know about. A couple other things. I'm going to go into I mentioned the platforms and the fast platform. So let's see, platforms and fast. Hello, I'm Brian. I write software for Fast Pinball, and for the past year or so, I've been working on rewriting the Fast Platform interface. I told you I started the MPF project back in 2014. And I was new to programming. MPF was new for me. Fast was new, and so I did the initial implementation of the Fast platform interface back then. And a lot of people Jan's done a lot of work on this in the years. Anthony's done a lot of work on this in the years. But Fast, we released our Neuron controller like a year ago, 6 months ago. We released our expansion bus, our retro boards. A lot of things have changed over the years, and the way we've been doing things in the past, it just needed to be sort of freshened up with the new way the MPF is written, the new way Fast stuff is written. So I'm working on the Fast platform interface. By the way, if you go to fastpinball.com, let me zoom in a little bit here, and go to docs, and let's go to, actually I'll make it easier. Let's go to Fast Pinball. I know you can't see that. Fast Pinball /MPF. This is the guide for Fast Pinball users on how they can use Mission Pinball Framework. And I talk about the MPF Neuron controller, our new controller. I'm working on the MPF 0.56.1 update. And there's guides here that explain how to use MPF with Fast. And I said, you need a special version of MPF for now. That's because there's the regular MPF. I forked this into the Fast Pinball MPF, where I'm working on this new Fast Pinball platform, which I'll merge back into the main MPF when I get that finished up in the next couple months or so. All the details are in here. The reason I mentioned MPF, let's see, where do we want to even look at? So there's a Fast platform interface. So inside MPF, platforms, Fast, the actual Fast platform, this is what specifies, this loads the Fast platform itself. And the platform interface within the land of MPF is standardized. So every device in MPF, you create a flipper. Well, you have to program flipper rules. This switch is connected to this flipper. It's a 2-coil flipper. There's an EOS switch, a not EOS switch. The platform interface has an API that works with all the device interfaces for MPF. All that code for the actual Fast platform interface is in here. So if I look for configure driver. So MPF, when it's loading, when it sees, there's a Fast driver and it's a Fast platform, it'll call this configure driver. Well, every platform has its own configure driver call. This is a Fast platform. So what happens when you configure a driver? Well, I'm checking, do you have a net connection? Does the driver have a number? These things that are needed. And then if it's a retro platform, it does this. If it's a nano or neuron, it does this. And then what's it doing in here? It's creating the driver, yada, yada, yada. So I won't get into all these details right now, but this is where it's actually going through. And man, we have some, I just see our video stuff resetting in the back. I'm sorry, internets. These communicators, so Fast, we are, Fast does not use drivers. It's serial ports, right? So what happens within Fast, there's your net connection, your RGB connection, your expansion connection, segment, audio, retro, all these different connections. Within the land of Fast, these are Fast communicators. So it's a serial communicator. So inside this communicator folder, you can see here's the net neuron communicator. This is the code that's responsible for talking to the neuron and sending updates back and forth. Here's the expansion bus communicator. That is talking to querying the expansion boards, finding out what's on there, looking up addresses, which board is active on the bus. Here's our segment display communicator talking to the segment displays, what is in that Fathom, the Haggis Fathom machine. So all these various communicators are what's actually talking to all the various serial interfaces on the Fast environment. And then we've got our audio interface, our DMD interface, our GI, the IO boards, Fast LEDs, all those kinds of things. So everything within the Fast land exists under here. It's our expectation, by the way, that the individual platforms owners, they maintain all their own configs. So, I'm sort of maintaining MPF now. People check things in. Except I'm merging those changes. I don't really have an opinion on whether features are good features or no features. I just say hey, if you have a feature and you write tests and those tests are good and they pass, add it in. When it comes to the Fast stuff, I'm writing all the Fast code itself. Everything else here is written by other people. So if, PROC users have some feature they want, they would write their code in a PROC. OPP or Cobra Pin is underneath here. The spike interface. So all the different platform owners are sort of responsible for maintaining their own platform code. So since I'm part of Fast Pinball. I maintain the Fast Pinball code underneath all of this stuff. I don't touch anything else outside of the Fast Pinball stuff when it comes to the platform interface. So yeah, what else? I think that's about it-ish. The other things I kind of want to mention is that, like, if you look at my version of Python that I'm running here, I'm running this on Python version 3.11. So if I go to GitHub, before I was on GitHub / Mission Pinball. Now if I go to GitHub, I'm on the Fast Pinball GitHub account. And this is where the Fast Pinball fork of MPF lives. And like I said, this doesn't matter right now for Fast Pinball users. You're going to download the Fast Pinball fork of MPF right now because that's what works with the Neuron. I will get this merged back in with the mainline MPF once this is done. But I want to show you. So it's GitHub on Fast Pinball. And you see this is a fork of Mission Pinball -MPF. I have a fork in here that's called Python 3.11 support. So one of the biggest challenges for MPF in the past is it only worked up to Python 3.9, which actually is in security only. This October, Python 3.9 goes into security only maintenance mode. It's not even supported anymore. They don't even make new installers for it. But Python 3.9 is the newest version of Python that MPF runs on. So we need to get this up to date. So I have in this fork right here, I have MPF running on Python 3.10 and Python 3.11. As I said, Python 3.12 comes out in October, and it's also running on those betas. No problem. It's cool because it took some updates to do. A lot of the asynchronous I/O stuff needed to be updated. I also had to update the YAML library. So MPF in the past was, it uses YAML, but it's some customized YAML. Like some things, like I was mentioning, it's not even worth going into. Going to the new MPF with the new YAML, you're going to have to do some find and replace in your config files. There's some things that require pluses. When you're doing a show and you can do it in increment +2 to do something 2 seconds later and it says +2. Well, YAML sees a +2 is just a 2. It's +2 and it just brings it in as a 2. Well, in MPF land, a +2 means add 2, which is different than just a 2, which means 2. Kind of annoying. Poor decisions I made 10 years ago. The bottom line, you still can use +2, you just got to put quotes around it. So I will have a guide that's hey, when you go to the latest MPF, you're gonna have to do some find and replace. It's not that bad. Fathom, Haggis's Fathom machine runs MPF. That's not a secret. I have their MPF code that I've been using as I'm working on the new versions of MPF, just because I have a Fathom and just to make sure it works with the latest everything. When I moved to Python 3.11 and this new find and replace, I was able to update the Fathom config files in 10 minutes. So it really wasn't the end of the world. It's just a couple find and replace kind of things. But what's cool is that means that we now as MPF land are on vanilla YAML, not our own kind of hacked YAML that's hard to use and everything. So it should be easier to keep MPF up to date from that point moving forward. So there will be a version of MPF that comes out probably 0.57 in the next, I'm not going to put a date on things because I get in trouble every time I do, but I'm working on the new 0.57. It'll have the newest fast support. It'll support Python 3.10 and 3.11 and 3.12 if I don't get to this before October. And it will be a little bit of 10-15 minutes to get your config files migrated over, but then you're on the latest version of Python, because if you're on the latest version of Python, half the MPF installation problems are because we're using old versions of Python, which means old versions of Kivy and old versions of dependencies, and it's just a nightmare. So by having the newest version of Python, now we can use Brew, now we can use these Py installers, now we can use all the very easy ways to install everything. It's going to be worth it. I promise you, the 10 minutes to migrate your config files to the new version will save you in installation headaches. I promise you. So anyway, that's what's happening in MPF kind of development land. I'm also going to be doing some work on the website. I recognize it's complicated right now because there's a lot of MPF websites. There's MPF, docs.mpf.org. There's developer.mpf.org. There's the actual missionpinball.mpf.org. There's hardware.missionpinball.org. So confusing. Who even know these websites? Some people here are hardcore MPF users for 10 years. Did you even know all these websites existed? The hardware website I'm trying to give over to, I told the pinballmakers.org website that I would just give them all this content. And I forget the guy that creates that. He was yeah, here's an account. You can go ahead and add it all yourself. So if anyone wants to do that migration, all this hardware content you can have. It exists in the GitHub repo right now. So anyway, sorry, overhead in my ears. I'm going through the process now of simplifying all these websites into just one website, missionpinball.org. It'll be a flat website. It'll have like all the documentation. It'll be very the fast pinball. Like part of my day job, I maintain the fast pinball website and the fast pinball documentation. It's in this environment called MK Docs. It's a modern documentation and web platform. It generates static sites. It's very easy to use. It uses Markdown. It's Python based. It's the MPF documentation right now and the websites are very complicated, which is why they're like kind of still old. And so one of my projects, actually, I'll just be honest. My girlfriend's going out of town next weekend. That's my project. I'm dog sitting and I'm by myself for like 48 hours. I'm migrating this stuff to that new website. And then I think it's gonna be easy for everyone to like contribute and keep the websites up to date. So that's what's happening. So I'm thinking, next few weeks, we're going to get the website up to date, and that's an easier platform. Throughout the summer, I'm going to be working on the new, the new fast platform interface and the Python 3.10, 3.11, 3.12 supports. So I think we're in pretty good shape. MPF contributing is, it's pretty basic Python. I did not know programming before I learned MPF. By the way, like I got into Python and I didn't know what object-oriented programming was. I did like BASIC as a kid, like GW Basic and like ASP.NET database programming. I didn't do like real programming at all. I didn't know what a method was, or a class, or an object, or a function versus a method. I knew nothing. And I learned it all for MPF, and you can too. So anyway, that's kind of a look at what MPF does under the hood if you're sort of new to MPF. I should say for support, we got two places. There's the MPF users Google group. This is a like public user-to-user forum. I'll jump in here sometimes. I'm not an MPF user myself. Like I don't make games in MPF. I make MPF itself. So like other users who actually write games with MPF are better at helping each other here. I'll jump in if people have installation problems or that kind of stuff. But this is more if you have like user help for MPF. If you have like developer stuff, if I go back to github.com/missionpinball, look at the discussions right here. This discussion tabs is like the MPF like developer discussions. So like where I'm talking about, hey, I'm doing the MPF like website documentation overhaul. I'm like, here's what I'm doing. Here's how I work today. Here's my new plan. If everyone has feedback, right? That's all tracked here. So if you want to get like the MPF developer talk and like where I sort of live and where I'm paying attention to things, it's the discussion on GitHub. If you're looking for like user-to-user MPF support, that's in that Google group. The Google group, it's MPF-users. It's off the homepage. You can find it. Just Google for MPF Google group. And then, like I said, man, ChatGPT, it's legit. I would use GPT version 4, which you have to pay for. It's $20 a month, but it can help with configs. It can help do things like pretty well. And even if I'm in here, going back in my tests, what do I want to do here? Just like pick a config file. I don't know how good my internet is here. There, you see how it's like auto-completing? This is GitHub Copilot. Like it knows MPF and can auto-complete for you. So if you GitHub Copilot, $100 a year also, use VS Code, use GitHub Copilot. It's autocomplete, is really good, and it does know MPF config files. And it even starting to understand the difference between config file versions. Like this pound config file version equals 5 is what tells GitHub, it's what tells MPF what version of a config file you have. It also tells ChatGPT what version you have. And it's getting like not the worst. It's not perfect at everything, but neither is an entry-level coder. So it's like having a free friend. So anyway, wow, I've talked for like an hour. That's MPF under the hood. There you go. Happy pinball making. Yeah, welcome to PinDevCon. Thanks for coming to our inaugural attempt. There's a QR codes on your feedback form on your chairs. So do that. What do you want to see, future sessions, that kind of stuff, let us know. We're having a reception tonight, sponsored by Fast Pinball, CoinTaker, and Planetary Pinball. Come up to that. It's on your sheet that's on your card as well. Take a sticker. We have Mission Pinball stickers. We have Fast Pinball stickers. We have PinDevCon stickers. Go out there and make pinball. Help us out. MPF, it's a community project of love. It's awesome. Join us. Thanks.